All right, fantastic. I'm really excited to have Chad Nelson with us on the Jobseekers Playbook. Chad is the master of his craft. So just to look, if you look at Chad's LinkedIn and his background, he has all the logos on his background. He's been at Apple, he's been at eBay, he's been at Atlassian, he's been at Indeed, and now he's the founder and CEO of Missing Link Recruitment. So job seekers that are out there, if anybody knows anything about hiring and recruiting and interviewing, Chad is your guy. So Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Definitely appreciate the intro. No pressure on the expert. I do what I can. I've learned along the way from many different people, including yourself and many different companies. And yeah, excited to be here. The introvert side of me is a little nervous, but I'm still super excited to be joining you and talking about what job seekers can do.
Oh, that's cool. Well, Chad, maybe we start off just give us like a little brief overview about why you decided to start your own company. Is you've been at all these big corporations, you've led talent acquisition, for massive companies and have been really successful. But what was it that, made you decide to kind of jump over to do your own thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. um, So, kind of taking you back, I've always been and had that entrepreneur spirit, right, if you will. I grew up in a family business. My parents and grandpa owned and still own a bowling business to this day. So I know a lot about bowling that normal people don't or average people don't, but we won't get into that.
Are you a good bowler? Have you had a perfect game before?
So it depends. No, I've never had a perfect game. I think my high is like 270 or something like that, somewhere around
That's
there.
pretty amazing.
Um, so it depends on who you ask. Now I haven't played in a while, so I'm about a 170, 175 average. So to the average bowler, that's good, but to actual legit league bowlers, no, not good. Um, but I grew up in that business from like sweeping floors and cleaning the place to doing the accounting work and a little everything in between. So I think a part of me always had the desire to start my own business and kind of control my own work, if you will, because when you work for some of these big enterprise companies, sometimes you don't have as much control or impact as maybe you'd like. And I got a push, if you will. I was at recruiting in tech and was part of a mass layoff at my last company. And as I sat down and kind of reflected on what I wanted to do and what's next for me, and talked to a bunch of different people, this naturally kind of came about. And yeah, I took the leap this summer, and it's been fun, exciting, and a lot of learning along the way. Have to get into finances and taxes that I haven't done beyond a personal standpoint in a long time. So, but it's been great getting to meet new people, new clients, and impact those companies in a different way. So, yeah, excited about the journey thus far, and yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. No, it's awesome. It's awesome to see your entrepreneurial spirit. And for all the listeners out there, Chad also does some work for us on Rev Talent. He's one of our top recruiters and working with a variety of different companies that we work with. And it's Chad's always a go-to when we have a really difficult to fill position because he does such a great job. So I'm excited to have Chad here today. We're going to talk about a lot of cool different things to help job seekers. And even Chad mentioned something just barely that we'll probably get into a little bit later around layoffs. There's a lot of people that have been laid off around the world over the last year or so. And Chad, he and I talked about this before. We'll probably go into that a little bit for him. We'll talk a little bit about the notorious green circle of open to work and get Chad's thoughts about that as well. But maybe before we get into that, Chad, let's just talk a little bit about your advice that you have for job seekers before they're even starting to think about, going after jobs. where should their mindset be? What should they be thinking about? How should they just start out their journey to be most effective?
Yeah, such a good question. I kind of liken it to if you were to do a project at work. I think most people have done some type of project at work. You wouldn't just start working on the project without any research, strategy, or thought. Well, at least I'd hope you wouldn't do that. It probably might not come out the way you would like if you just dove straight in, right? But I find a lot of people that do that search for jobs just dive straight in.
Yeah. Yep.
They don't put any thought, research, or strategy into it, and so my advice is to do that, and in a number of ways I kind of break that down. First, I recommend just kind of reflecting on what you care about most in your next opportunity, right? It's one of my favorite questions to talk to candidates about, because that really starts to match up, yes, the role, but also the company too, right? Like, so for example, if you like collaborating with a lot of people and incremental change over time and things like that, working at a small startup that needs to move at lightning speed probably isn't going to work for you, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa, right? If you just like to get your hands in there, make impact real quick, make quick decisions, working at a large enterprise that has more established, more processes, more people to meet with to make change happen may not be the right direction for you, right? So, but think about what you care most about in a role, a company, and whatnot, because I think it all starts from there. That will help kind of ground you in what you're looking for in your next role. So as you search, yes, you're going to search for titles of, accountant or engineer or whatever that may be, but you can have a little bit more of a filter in terms of what you're actually applying for, what you're actually going after. So I always recommend that's the first thing. The second thing, when you start thinking about that, the details matter, like across the board, not just on your resume, but LinkedIn, um, all your profile, how you kind of approach the market and everything really matters, right? So, for example, if you've gone through a layoff, like we were talking about, putting that on your resume is helpful if you're going to start applying. Putting that on your LinkedIn is helpful if you want recruiters to start seeking you out. Um, you'd never want to put the hiring manager, the recruiter, in a place where they are making massive assumptions,
Yeah.
and they have to assume positive intent of what's going on and what happened, right? So always thinking about like those details, or the details of the type of role, right? If I know there's the kind of the age old, like if you have 10 requirements and you don't meet X amount, don't apply. That's not necessarily true, but how do you convey that you meet most of those requirements, I think is really important. If you're just applying with blanket resumes, it's hit or miss, and it's your least um, likely chance to be successful in the market, applying with the same resume to every single job. So the other thing, talking about research, you probably don't hear this a lot, but I think it's fine to somewhat research the job market in general and get a pretty good understanding of what's happening. So, for example, what I think about is remote, hybrid, in-person work right now. If you just got laid off, last month, and all you're doing is looking for remote work, surprise, the market doesn't have as much remote opportunities
Yeah.
as it did if you were in the workforce a year or two ago, right? Think about people that were hired in 2020. I mean, most jobs that didn't have to be somewhere in person were starting remote or had an aspect of remote. And a lot of companies have changed that mentality, whether they've gone to a hybrid model or, brought everybody back in office. So researching that market a little bit can really really be beneficial. And I think there's a couple areas where you can research. Um, you can look at the unemployment rate, which in the US market with all the headlines and everything is still pretty low. It's below 4%, right? So, oh, I forgot. I have a Mac, and every time I stick my thumb up, it gets excited. So I'll have to not talk with my hands. But yeah, look at the unemployment rate, look at the market for the roles you're applying to. So for example, I'm working different roles today from marketing and sales to accounting, and I'll tell you my accounting role has a lot of applicants, a lot more applicants across the board. So it's a lot more competitive right now in that space. So think about how you're going to stand out. And I think ultimately doing that research is for that benefit alone to understand what type of market is this, how competitive is it, to have that realization of, okay, if it's super competitive, how do I stand out to X employer, or how do I make strategic decisions to go after the right jobs? For example, one of my recruiters at my previous company that got laid off with me recognized this right off the bat and started going after local jobs. Got a lot more interviews than other recruiters in the same situation he was in. Got a position and a couple offers pretty quickly. Went after a local job. So just a way to think about it kind of strategically. And those are kind of the top things I'd think about as you start to enter and think about the market.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Chad, why do you think people skip that whole step? Why do they just kind of go out and apply to everything and not take a second to think about what do you think's going on there in people's minds? Because honestly, like this is happening a lot. What do you think it is?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think it's people's natural thought process to do that because most likely that's what they've done in the past and it's been successful. I'd also say a lot of these companies, I used to work for Indeed, a lot of these companies try to make it easy for the job seeker where, hey, here's all that you need, right? It's at your fingertips. You don't have to do a lot. Click this button and put your resume here, right? And that's it. So I think there's been a lot of companies out there that do make it easy or seem easy to get in the process. But if you want to be successful, just applying and just clicking or just pressing that button may not be the best strategy for you.
Yeah.
So they've probably done it in the past, or they just assume it's the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think those things are right. And the other thing I've been thinking about a lot is just maybe the fear that people have. Whether they've lost their job or whatever their situation is, why they're looking for a job. There's this fear of, oh my gosh, I've got to get a job and I've got to get it now. I've got to provide for my family. I'm just going to get everything out there. And then they lose maybe the sense of confidence of who they are. And that's one of the big things that I'd share with people is, just take a step back, take a deep breath for just a second and realize there's a lot of value that you provide. And you need to remember that for just a second. Like, okay, here's all the good things that I can do. Here's all the things that I'm capable of. Here's all the experiences I've done in the past that have made companies be successful. I can do that again in the future. And I just hope job seekers kind of realize like, yes, it is scary. There can be some fear, but don't let that fear cripple you into making the wrong mistakes about how to approach it and approach it how Chad is talking about approaching it. So
yeah, it's such a good point. It goes back to that project analogy. I do think people see a project and they just go after it at times, right? And if that's your mentality, sometimes it works and you produce great work, but it may not be the best way to approach job seeking, especially in today's market.
Well, and Chad, you talked about how different companies make it easy to apply. Let's shift gears that way for just a second and talk about how that maybe is a bad thing for job seekers in getting a successful outcome. Whether it's Indeed or LinkedIn or other job boards that have like the one-click apply and things like that. and not going in and adjusting your resume and not going in and targeting what you're trying to go after. Talk to us a little bit about, what's the best way to approach that, and how can candidates be more successful in what they apply to, how they apply, how they prep for that? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's if you're familiar with recruiting, you know that typically in most recruiting situations, applicants make up the least amount of hires between different sources of how you get candidates, right? So you think of different sources. You have referrals, you have people that used to work for the company, people that have worked for um, someone in at the company that is now employed at the company, people that have worked for the hiring manager previously and they're bringing somebody over. You see that all the time. Then you kind of get into people that are sourced from different recruiters, right, and actually are sought out and found based on their profile. There's unique set of skills that the role is looking for, and applicants usually comes in last in kind of the grand scheme of things of how many people get hired from the applicant pool. So that doesn't mean as an applicant don't apply, or as an applicant you need to kind of limit your approach there. You have to have a referral or it's not going to work or anything like that. But what I would do is be really thoughtful on how you get in front of a company or a recruiter or a hiring manager, right? The advice that you hear thrown around a lot now, and it's great advice, is don't apply for this mass amount of roles, but find specific roles and be really strategic about how you go after them. So me as a candidate, what I've done before is I've actually, when I've looked at a role, found a role I like, I'd apply, yes, but then I actually do research on, okay, who at this company could potentially be the hiring manager or the recruiter. And sometimes on these sites like LinkedIn, they actually show the recruiter, or Indeed might actually have a way of reaching the recruiter through email, and use that as your outlet, right? Like if you apply and actually see the recruiter on there and don't reach out, I don't say it's a disadvantage for you, but I guarantee you there's somebody else who applied who saw the
100%.
recruiter and is talking to that recruiter,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you have to take advantage of that opportunity, but also do your research on that, right? Like you may not be able to find the right person, but even asking other people, like, who is that right person that I could reach out to? I'll say anybody in my past experience that reached out to me and specifically said, I'm looking for X person for this role, I've responded. Now, people that have reached out and said, here's my resume, tell me what you tell me what jobs I'm qualified for at your company. That I used to receive like 5 of those a day, and it's very hard to respond to something like that. And in fact, it shouldn't be the hiring manager or the recruiter's job to do that. You should think of it as a candidate as your job to say, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Can you help? Can you provide some advice? And I'll tell you, like 9 times out of 10, that person, if you say specifically what you're looking for, what you need help with, they will respond. So doing that research is extremely important. Going beyond just the application, you're going to find a lot more success there. Talking to someone from the company, trying to find the right, hiring manager or recruiter, you're much more likely to find success doing that.
And Chad, to your point, recruiters get bombarded day in and day out on LinkedIn today now, like tons of messages from people. And what you're saying is recruiters are more likely to respond to you if you're super specific to the role, specific, that you've already applied to the role. Here's the requisition number, like all those details. Hey, can you connect me to the hiring manager? Hey, can you connect me to the recruiter that's working on that role? You're going to be much more likely to get a response. I get LinkedIn messages all the time too, even from people that I've worked with or people that I've been friends with, and they'll send me this really vague LinkedIn message like, "Hey, I'm thinking about looking at for new roles," and then that's it, and then there's nothing else. It's like, oh, okay, well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do about that?
Yeah.
Are you asking me for my help? What's the ask? I think that's the thing. Is like people are so busy, and in this day and age now, I feel like people are less responsive just in general, because they're so bombarded. So if I don't have the information that I need specific enough, I may not, like, I try to respond to everybody as much as possible. But if you haven't done enough work or put in enough effort to create
Yep.
an ask and do the research, like you're saying, you're gonna fall short every single time.
That's such a good point. And I think that point about effort, what type of effort do you put into your application, and see your application besides here's my resume, right? What type of effort do you put beyond that increases your chances, right? Across the board of at least talking to somebody, right? Like the best advice I got as a job seeker um, was something I read online years ago that essentially, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, says really think of recruiting or hiring or getting a job as a game. And not as a game as you need to like fake things or anything like that, but a game with levels, right? So there's different levels of hiring process. Typically starts with a recruiter, sourcer, somebody from the talent acquisition team, internal, external. Then it typically goes to hiring manager. Then it typically goes to a panel, et cetera, right? So how do you get in front of the recruiter is the thing that you kind of got to put yourself in the mindset of, or how do you get yourself to the hiring manager, even if you want to think of that as step one or step two. And then you kind of take steps to do that, right? So, look on LinkedIn to see if you find the recruiter for that role or the hiring manager, and put yourself in a situation where, you ask, right? And that, the worst that can happen is they say no, but at least you're putting that attempt out there, right? And that effort beyond, here's my resume, let me hope and pray, because that's the hardest way to get hired at a company today.
Yeah, that's interesting. Cool. Well, let's shift gears. Let's talk about let's say, you've put the effort in, you've done your research, you've done your homework, you've applied strategically to the right roles that you qualify for, that, are going to lend towards you getting an interview. And let's say you get an interview. So what should job seekers be thinking about coming into the interview process and going through the interview process?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Your preparations shouldn't stop after you get past round one or get to round one. Um, I think that's where probably preparation just should increase even more. I think it's perfectly fine to ask for each round what to be prepared for. Maybe the person you're talking to, hiring manager, recruiter, doesn't know or gives you kind of a general answer. But I'm a person who likes to be prepared. I don't like walking into situations just like, hey, let's ask random questions and kind of figure it out or whatnot. Um, but I personally like being prepared, and I think asking for things like that, it can help, directionally kind of put you in the right mindset of what to prepare for. And the reason you want to prepare is when a company's hiring and they are looking for a certain amount of skills, you may not have all of them. And chances are a lot of people get hired and they don't have 100% of what a company is looking for. It's
Sure.
just reality. Most companies put together a job description, they list 10 things of requirements, and they end up hiring somewhere around 6, 7, somewhere around there, right? Like, and they feel good about that person. As a candidate, how do you understand what the company is looking for and convey what you've done to that relevant experience, right? So I know we talked about earlier, the difference between a large enterprise company and a small startup, right? Like, well, maybe all your experience is at a large enterprise company, but how do you convey your capability of working in a startup, making
Yeah.
quick decisions, owning different aspects of what you do, to that company or to that recruiter or hiring manager. Um, and that, I think, is a unique skill set that takes time, preparation, and practice. Uh, and I say all that saying, like, but it also has to be a part of your experience too. Like, you can't just make something up, right? But you do need to convey from your experience how what they're looking for, you have translatable experience. If you are waiting for them to assume you have translatable experience, it's probably not going to happen. But if you can paint a picture and tell that story of, hey, here's where my experience matches up to what you're looking for, you're going to be much more successful in any type of conversation that you have in the interview process. So um, I find preparation for every interview is extremely important. Asking what to prepare for, hopefully you get something back. But if not, reading through that job description, reading through, the company and what the company cares about, and conveying your experience, how it relates to them.
Yeah. I like that. That actually just this week, Chad, I had somebody that was prepping for an interview and had asked for some coaching, like help me through this interview process. What should I be thinking about? How should I do it? And so this person has interviewed, with a variety of different companies, but just hasn't been able to get that final offer at the end of the day. And they're like, I just need help. Help me with this. And so sat down with them. They showed me a job description of the role that they were applying for and interviewing for. And so I just took some of those requirements, the top requirements for the role, and then I started asking questions. And this is where I think a coach could come really in handy for people. I don't think people think about it. I think when you don't have a job and you don't have money coming in, you're actually afraid to spend money because you're like,
Yeah.
how should I spend money on a coach when I don't have money coming in? Whereas, what if you did spend money on a coach and you could get a job like weeks faster, months faster,
Mm-hmm.
like way faster? What would that look like? And right off the bat, when I started interviewing this person, I could see it clearly. It's like, oh my goodness. Like they would jump right into, you'd ask him a question where you're a behavioral based question, like tell me about a time when, but then they just jump right to tactics. Well, here's what I do. I do this and this and this. The tactics were fine and were great, but you're looking for kind of a story. You're looking to try to understand, like, show me that this experience happened. How did you overcome it? What actions did you take? How did you resolve it? What did you learn from it? And so we did a question like that. I gave him the feedback, and then we went into the next question. He did the same thing. He jumped right back into tactics. And it was kind of interesting because I think people going into interviews, whether you've interviewed a lot or you've interviewed a little, like getting help from somebody like a coach could make all the difference in the world for you landing an amazing job, getting a job quicker. There's just little subtleties of things that can help you be more successful, which I didn't put a lot of thought into until just this week. Is like, oh my gosh, I think everybody that's going into an interview needs a coach. Just like
Mm-hmm.
if you're a basketball team, a professional basketball, like Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan had coaches. He was the best basketball player of all time, right? But at the end of the day, he still had coaches and trainers that were helping him push him harder, push him to do greater things, and ultimately become more successful.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And to that, sports analogy, I was seeing Nick Saban talk, and he has coaches.
Yeah.
You think about one of the greatest coaches, in college football, maybe ever, but definitely right now. He has multiple coaches himself, right? So, yes, no, and I think the investment part is a tough thing to overcome, but interviewing is a skill. It's an art, and storytelling specifically in interviewing is a skill and an art. And some people are really good at it, and some people just naturally aren't. I can say I'm naturally not. I'd practice in front of my wife if I was interviewing. Give me some tough feedback for sure, and kind of work through all that. But yeah, no, it, and I'll tell you, if you practice, you're going to feel much better coming out of that interview typically, because most people after an interview know, like, they have that feeling, oh, I should have said this or I should have done this, right? Like, I can't even count on two hands how many times I've had that feeling coming out of an interview, like, oh, I should have said this or should have positioned it this way or all that stuff. And that's naturally going to happen. But I think, preparing for it, having a coach, having somebody, by your side that you can practice that art, because it really is an art.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Chad, what are some of the things that you've done in your career that or your journey that has helped you land the jobs that you've had over your career? What are your superpowers or secrets to landing the job?
Yeah, I have a few that have worked for me in the past. I'd say, again, I've taken that levels approach, the game approach, that here's a game with every level. And I don't play the game the same way all the times, right? Like when it's more competitive. So again, with recent layoffs and especially in talent acquisition at tech companies, the landscape, the market right now is extremely competitive, right? So knew I couldn't take the same approach that I did maybe years ago. But outside of, and we talked about earlier, kind of reaching out to people, trying to connect with people, find the right person, asking specific questions along the way. I'd say if you're in that conversation, don't be afraid to ask very direct or open questions. Hey, like, when you first talk to a recruiter, what are the top 3 things or top 5 things that are most important to the hiring manager who I know I'll potentially talk to next,
Yeah.
right? And as you're having that conversation, what candidates have not been successful at talking to a hiring manager? Think of questions that I don't hear a lot, and I think a lot of people are afraid to ask because they're very direct. And those have always exposed me to the other end of, or the other side of the hiring process, which is the hiring manager's thoughts, opinions, and what would make someone most successful in the role. I heard a long time ago, one of the best questions to ask after an interview is, hey, did I not thoroughly answer your questions, or are there any missing pieces or any hesitations you have about me as a candidate? And the first time I asked that, I was so scared. I was so scared to ask that question because I'm like, what are they going to tell me? And are they even going to give me real information? But I'll tell you, for the majority of people I've asked that type of question, like, what hesitations do you have about me as a candidate, or what did I not answer thoroughly? People tend to be pretty honest. Like, hey, as you described this, like, I didn't get a good sense of that. And I was like, and then you have an honest, genuine conversation there, and you're almost breaking down a little barrier that happens in recruiting or hiring in general, where it's like, me as the hiring manager, me as the person, I'm asking questions, you do the answering, and sometimes I have this wall up, and it's hard to break down that wall. But I'd say asking really thoughtful, thorough questions. Again, prepare for them, right? Be thoughtful in what you're going to ask and who you're asking, and why you're asking them that question. But I'd say that's always helped me, as I'm more of a introvert, strategic mind than a storyteller. So I know if I don't tell a story really well, I can ask, and maybe, hopefully, and majority of time, people will kind of answer that for me. So that's I'd say something that I haven't thrown out there that I think has been successful for me in the past. Um, and then preparation. Can't reiterate enough, preparation. Understanding when you go into an interview, who you're talking to, what you need to convey, and preparing for it as best you can.
Cool. Well, let's talk about the last thing I want to ask you about is the notorious green circle of open to work. I just want to get your I want to get your take. I want to get your thoughts on this. There's a lot going on, a lot of conversation going on LinkedIn about whether you put the green circle on, you don't put the green circle on. What's your take on it, Chad?
Yeah, it's it's a hot topic, right? So I'll share a couple thoughts that I have. So on LinkedIn, from a kind of logistics standpoint, you don't have to put the green circle up to show recruiters with LinkedIn recruiting that you're open to work. It does, however, show people like hiring managers or maybe smaller companies that don't have a recruiting workforce or don't pay for a subscription like that, that you are open to work. Um, I know in my heart it's meant to be helpful, but I also know people, because I've been in the people business for a while, and I know people are naturally biased,
Yep.
whether we like it or not. It's just a fact. People are naturally biased. I also know it takes a lot to change behaviors. Humans aren't natural change agents, and it takes a unique um, approach or open-mindedness for people to change and adapt really quickly. And I also know that the idea has been implanted in people's minds that passive candidates are always better than active candidates. So I know all those things to be facts. I'll say that. And the last thing I'll also say is empathy is not doesn't come natural to a lot of people. So if people haven't been in a situation where they've lost a job out of their control, like layoffs in tech right now, and I know layoffs have been happening for a very long time to a lot of different people, then people can be biased. Oh, well, why'd this person get laid off, right? Like, were they not performing? Were they a bottom performer or stuff like that, right? Like that would be my decision making of selecting those people, right? And so if you haven't been through, because I've worked in situations, I'm very familiar with situations where people have done layoffs based off of how much cost they are charging for a company. So if you don't know that and haven't been a part of that, um, it can lead to those natural biases and assumptions and all those things. So I don't know if I have like advice. I know I personally experimented for a little bit of having the green banner versus not having the green banner. I yielded the exact same results. So it didn't really change much here or there. But that's where I'd say if you're in the market and you're being active, go above and beyond just having the green banner anyways, right? Like if you're having the green banner and just submitting application after application, less likely to be successful versus having that strategic approach. And this is a role I really want. This is a role I'm really qualified for. How do I get in front of the right people? But would love to hear your thoughts, Jeremy. It's definitely a hot topic of conversation for sure.
Yeah, no, and I think what you're shared is super helpful. Um, Maybe I'll touch on kind of what you said about layoffs for just a second and kind of how layoffs occur. Like there's so many different elements of why people get laid off. To your, you mentioned some people, it might be that they cost a lot. Like they're costing the company a lot of money, and the company doesn't have that money to fork out anymore, and so it's simply just a cost component. Some things that might be like, hey, we don't need this part of this division anymore within our company. We've changed, we've added this different technology, and we actually don't need this group of people. And so like I wish that companies would do a better job of upskilling those type of people and saying, oh, well, we have other opportunities over here, let's upskill you and bring you over into this other department. I think companies could do a much better job of that. And there's so many awesome platforms out there that can help upskill people to become more successful. I worked at Pluralsight for a couple of years, and the whole platform is built to help enhance skills and enhance people's technologies. I'd highly recommend companies utilize a platform like Pluralsight. There's other ones out there in the market, and help upskill people and give them the opportunity. Because I think a lot of people are very capable of shifting into different things if given the opportunity. Some people aren't. Some people at the end of the day, like they just won't ever be able to be agile. Agility, I think, is probably the most important thing any employee can have in the market now going
Yes.
forward. You can't be stuck in your ways. You've got to be able to learn and adapt and change and grow. If you're not, that's going to really be that albatross that's holding you back. Um, there's also in layoffs, there is also sometimes it's lower performers that,
Hmm.
aren't doing great and the company is moving them out. So there's so many different reasons, and I only listed a few. Like there's a lot more reasons than that. And they're hard. Layoffs are hard and they're frustrating, they're challenging. Like I've seen and been a part of having to organize layoffs for different companies. It was the worst part of my job. Like
Mm.
I hated doing that because people are so important, and every person matters. So one of the biggest things that I hate when people talk about business and they say, well, it's not personal, it's just business. And it's like, oh my gosh, everything that you do in business is personal. Every
Hmm.
conversation you have, every and yeah, like you might have to lay somebody off and you're not meaning it to be personal, but it still it still becomes personal to that person that gets laid off. And so how do you have the
Absolutely.
empathy that you're talking about? um in terms of advice or recommendation I'd have around the green banner, to your point, like with the biases that are just inherent in people, I don't know that I would personally utilize the green banner if I was looking for a role. I take other tactics and other approaches to do it, and I think you can be more successful that way. I'm not saying don't do it or it's bad, but to your point, I just think that there's a lot of bias out there, and people will just think, oh well, this person isn't great. And it's like, well, that's actually not true. You don't know my whole story. You don't you know so I think it's tricky. My advice is to not go with the green banner. I think you have more opportunity, but you will ultimately have to explain, why you've left a company or why you're no longer at a company. And I liked your advice on in your resume, just putting, that there was a layoff, here was the reasons why, and just being really
Hmm.
upfront about it. And so that there's a lot of context and clarity for those that are looking at you as a potential employee of the company.
Yep. And I would definitely not do a green banner without being super active for sure. Like I can share that um, for sure. Like putting posts out there saying, "Hey, this is what happened. Here's why I'm out in the market." Looking and also being active, contributing um, to people's feed because the idea behind it being positive and on the pro side is it's a visual cue for someone in your network to help you along with hopefully potentially recruiters and hiring managers and whatnot. But if you're not using it as a visual cue and you just put up the green banner and then never post or aren't really active in the network, then it's just a green banner attached to your profile that someone has to go actively find your profile to look at. So
Yeah.
um, I would definitely say that never do the green banner by itself, because that is going to lead to people's biases for sure. So I'd agree on that point.
Yeah. And I think when I see some people's green banners, sometimes I'll see people that are being super negative about the company that they left,
Oh
and
yeah.
just start this diatribe of all this negativity related to it. And 100%, it sucks to be laid off. It sucks to not have a job. But if you bring the storm cloud with you going forward, you have to be self-aware, and you have to be able to check that at the door and say, yep, this sucks, but I'm going to check it at the door and I'm going to bring my best self into everything that I do. I think that will help a lot of people. I mean, basically, if you are going the negative route of all the stuff that's happened to you and all the stuff that's bad, I mean, that stuff just lives on the internet forever. And somebody
Hmm.
will probably come see that and be like, gosh, Jeremy was so negative about all these things. I don't know that he's going to bring a positive atmosphere to our company. I'm going to look for somebody different. So I think that's another thing to just be aware of. I've also seen people that have been super positive about, looking for a new opportunity and talking well of their prior company and their prior bosses and things like that. Like, it's just amazing the difference in those two types of people. And
Hmm.
the positive person is going to win out, a million times to one of the negative side. So that's just probably something else I'd kind of watch out for if I'm a job seeker using the banner.
100%. Yeah, put positivity out there, and hope positivity comes right back. I'll even say to that point, there's a couple fellow colleagues of mine that were a part of the layoff at my previous company that I've just seen hired back at that previous company, and they put positivity out there, and they did not put any negativity. Right, so you never know what could happen.
Yeah.
Even get the boomerang back to the company that you were previously at. Right, so.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how many boomerangs there are, and that's a great thing. Like, gosh, boomerangs for companies can be fantastic because you've already been trained on all the systems and the culture, and like you already know it. Like, what a great opportunity for companies to bring people back. So, making sure not to burn any of those bridges, and keep an open mind. So,
Yep, for sure,
awesome.
build those bridges.
Yeah.
Don't
Well,
burn
cool,
them.
Chad. Well, you've been awesome today. Thank you for sharing, gosh, all this knowledge. Is there anything you want to leave job seekers with, that last bit nugget of wisdom that would be helpful for our job seekers?
Ooh, last nugget of wisdom. I'd say the thing that comes to mind is don't be afraid to ask for help. A lot of people don't ask for help in their job seeking journey. I see it all the time. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Ask former colleagues, ask people you are familiar with in your inner circle, people that can help you in any form or fashion. The worst thing that they could say is no, but hopefully most people are very genuinely willing to help if you're specific about that. So don't go at it alone. It can be a lonely journey if you don't have a job and you're searching for one. So don't be afraid to ask for help. That would be my last little nugget that I'd share.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's good, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier around the people that do get hired, aren't necessarily the applicants. The applicants might be that lower on the list, but if you're working through people and networking with people, your chances are going to increase significantly. So I think that's great advice. Get help. Get help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, Chad. Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate having you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. It's been great.